On May 16th, Donald Trump sent Iran a nuclear proposal. He did not announce it publicly with fanfare. He did not hold a press conference. He sent it quietly, through backchannels, with a warning attached. Swift progress, the message said, was necessary to avoid serious consequences. 24 hours later, Iran announced it would soon reveal its own new plan. And the world, which has been watching this negotiation collapse and restart for 78 days, is now waiting again, wondering whether this time is different, or whether it is just another loop in the same exhausting cycle. Let me tell you exactly where things stand today, what Trump's new proposal says, what Iran is preparing to offer in return, why the gap between the two sides is simultaneously smaller and more dangerous than at any previous point in this war, and why the next 24 to 48 hours are the most consequential window this negotiation has seen since the ceasefire was declared on April 8th. To understand today, you need to understand how we got here, because the path to this moment is not a straight line. It is a series of near misses, rejected proposals, broken commitments, and sudden shifts that have left every analyst trying to track this story with the persistent feeling that they are watching a negotiation that both sides want and neither side can close. The war began on February 28, 2026. U.S. and Israeli forces struck Iran's nuclear facilities, its military infrastructure, and killed its supreme leader. Iran responded by closing the Strait of Hormuz. For 78 days, the waterway that carries 20% of the world's daily oil supply has been effectively shut to most international shipping. Oil prices surged. Food prices followed. Economies from Bangladesh to Germany began absorbing the shock. And Washington and Tehran entered a diplomatic dance that has produced more proposals than results. The first U.S. proposal came in late March. It demanded 6 things: the end of Iran's nuclear program, limits on its ballistic missiles, the reopening of Hormuz, restrictions on Iranian support for regional armed groups like Hezbollah, and sanctions relief in exchange for compliance. Iran rejected it. An anonymous Iranian official told state media, "Iran will end the war when it decides to do so and when its own conditions are met." Then came Iran's counterproposals, a 5-point plan, then a 10-point plan, then the 14-point response submitted in early May that Trump famously called a piece of garbage and said he stopped reading after the first sentence. Each round raised the same core disagreements. Iran wants sovereignty over the Strait of Hormuz. The U.S. wants Iran's nuclear program permanently dismantled. Neither side has budged on what it considers its absolute floor. A ceasefire was eventually brokered by Pakistan on April 8th, but it has been violated repeatedly by both sides. A shadow drone war has continued in the Gulf. Iran seized ships. An Indian vessel was sunk. The U.S. maintained its naval blockade of Iranian ports. The ceasefire existed on paper and almost nowhere else. J.D. Vance called it a fragile truce on the same day it was announced. He was not wrong. Then Trump went to Beijing. He met Xi Jinping on May 14th and 15th, and something shifted. On Air Force One, flying back from Beijing on May 15th, Trump said something that no one in his administration had said with this kind of clarity before. He told reporters he would accept a 20-year suspension of Iran's uranium enrichment if Iran gave a real guarantee. Not a permanent halt, not zero enrichment forever. 20 years, with real verification and the removal of all existing enriched uranium from Iranian territory. This was a significant departure. His chief negotiator, Steve Witkoff, had said in April that Iran must give up all enrichment of nuclear fuel in any deal because enrichment enables weaponization. Trump himself had said in April that the terms of the deal would ensure no enrichment of uranium. And then suddenly, on a plane over the Pacific, the position moved. 20 years is enough, Trump said, but the level of guarantee from them is not enough. It has got to be a real 20 years, not a fake one. He also added a phrase that changed the geometry of the conversation. He said that to get the enriched uranium that currently sits buried under the rubble of bombed Iranian nuclear sites, only 2 countries have the technical capability to retrieve it: the United States and China. And Iran, he said, had not yet agreed to let the material be removed. That detail is not minor. Iran is sitting on approximately 460 kilograms of uranium enriched to 60% purity. At 90% enrichment, that material can be used for nuclear weapons. U.S. strikes have buried much of it under rubble at destroyed facilities. But the material still exists, and whoever retrieves it, or fails to, determines whether the war actually achieved its stated objective of preventing Iran from having nuclear weapons capability. Trump is saying the mission is not complete. Iran is saying it will not agree to terms that require surrendering the material. And China, which could technically retrieve it, is being quietly positioned as a possible solution, if Washington can trust Beijing not to do a backdoor deal with Tehran on the way out. This is the background against which Trump, on May 16th, sent Iran a new nuclear proposal. The details have not been officially released, but based on everything that has been reported from both sides over the past week, the contours are clear. The U.S. is offering a 20-year enrichment halt, during which a regional consortium facility, possibly in a third country, would produce nuclear fuel for Iran's civilian power program. Iran would give up its existing enriched material. Sanctions would be progressively lifted. Economic benefits would flow, and in exchange, Iran would accept international inspections and give up any independent path to a nuclear weapon for 2 decades. Iran's Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi, speaking at the BRICS foreign ministers meeting in New Delhi this week, gave the clearest public signal yet of where Tehran stands. He acknowledged that Trump had previously called Iran's proposal unacceptable and said so publicly on social media. But then he said, "We received messages again from the Americans saying they are willing to continue the talks and continue the interaction." That is a significant statement. It means that despite the public drama, the garbage comments, the life support declarations, the mutual accusations, the back channel is still open. Both sides are still talking. And both sides apparently want a deal enough to keep talking even after publicly insulting each other's proposals. Iran's new plan, which it announced it would reveal soon, is expected to address the nuclear file more directly than any previous Iranian proposal has done. The earlier 14-point plan was silent on nuclear matters entirely. It focused on ending the war, compensation, Hormuz sovereignty, sanctions relief. The new plan, according to sources, will engage with the nuclear question. The specific terms are not yet known, but the fact that Iran is now willing to address enrichment at all, when for months it refused to put the nuclear file on the table during active conflict, is itself a shift. The question is whether the shift is enough. Here is where the gap between the two sides still lies, and why it is simultaneously narrower and more treacherous than before. Trump says 20 years of enrichment suspension is acceptable if the guarantee is real. What does real mean? It means physical removal of all existing enriched uranium. It means dismantlement of enrichment infrastructure, not just mothballing. It means inspections with immediate and automatic snapback provisions if Iran violates any term. And it means no ambiguity about what happens at year 21. Iran's position, as best as can be reconstructed from public statements and leaked details, is different on every one of those points. Iran has not agreed to physical removal of enriched uranium. Iranian officials have described the enrichment program as a sovereign right and a national achievement. The Supreme Leader's advisor called Trump's desired control over the Iranian nuclear program a fantasy. And Iran's counteroffer on timeline, reportedly a 5-year halt, was so far from Washington's position that Trump rejected it immediately and distanced himself from his own negotiators' 20-year offer within days of it being made. So the gap is real, but the willingness to continue talking despite the gap is also real. And that combination, real disagreement, real engagement, is the most dangerous phase of any negotiation, because it is the phase where miscalculation is most likely, where one side reads continued engagement as a signal that the other side will eventually move, where deadlines get set and then extended, and then set again, where a single statement, a single rejected proposal, a single ship seized in the wrong place at the wrong moment can collapse the entire structure. Trump has been explicit about what happens if the talks fail. Speaking to reporters before boarding Air Force One earlier this week, he said, "If they do something bad, there is a possibility it could happen," referring to resumed military strikes. He said Iran had been decimated by months of conflict and a naval blockade. He said the country was desperate for a settlement. And he said that if they misbehave, Washington could resume attacks. But here is the problem with that framing. Iran does not appear to believe it has been decimated in any way that changes its fundamental negotiating position. Its foreign minister is traveling to international forums and accusing the UAE of being a war criminal. Its navy is seizing ships and establishing selective passage protocols in the Strait of Hormuz. It is announcing new peace plans on its own timeline. These are not the actions of a country that believes it is negotiating from a position of desperation. They are the actions of a country that believes time is on its side, that every week the strait stays closed, every week oil prices stay above $100 a barrel, every week Western economies absorb the cost of this conflict. The pressure on Washington to accept Iranian terms increases. There is also the War Powers Act dimension that almost no mainstream coverage is addressing properly. May 29, 2026 marks 60 days since the U.S. launched military action against Iran on February 28. Under the War Powers Resolution passed by Congress in 1973, a president must obtain congressional authorization to continue military operations beyond that 60-day mark. Trump has already said his lawyers consider the War Powers Act unconstitutional, following a long line of presidents who have made the same argument. But the White House released a letter to Congress this week that takes that argument seriously enough to put it in writing. The legal clock is running, and if Congress decides to force a confrontation over authorization, which it has never successfully done in the post-Vietnam era, but which has more political relevance now, given the economic pain the war is causing at home, the Trump administration would face a domestic political crisis layered on top of the international one. And then there is Israel. Israel is watching every word of these negotiations with an anxiety it is no longer fully concealing. The ceasefire Trump declared on April 8 did not include Lebanon. Trump explicitly said Hezbollah was not covered by the deal. Israeli operations in southern Lebanon have continued. Iran has accused Israel of violating the ceasefire with those attacks, and Israeli officials have not ruled out striking Iran's nuclear facilities independently, even as U.S.-Iran talks continue, if they conclude that any deal Washington reaches falls short of permanently eliminating Iran's nuclear capacity. An Israeli strike during active negotiations would not just complicate the talks, it would end them, permanently and immediately, and it would force Washington into an impossible position. Either endorse the strike and watch the war escalate to a level no previous analysis has modeled, or distance itself from Israel publicly in a way that fractures the alliance that has defined American Middle East policy for 75 years. This is the landscape in which Iran's new plan is about to be revealed. A U.S. proposal sent on May 16 that moved the American position on enrichment duration, but not on verification or material removal. An Iranian announcement that a new plan is coming, with signals that this time the nuclear file will actually be addressed. A ceasefire that exists in name, but not in practice. A war powers clock that started ticking on February 28. An Israeli wildcard that neither side can fully control, and a global economy that has been absorbing the cost of a closed strait for 78 days and is beginning to show structural cracks that do not close even when the strait eventually reopens. Trump sent the proposal. Iran said it would respond soon. The next 24 hours will tell us whether soon means something meaningful this time or whether the cycle simply continues. Another proposal, another rejection, another extension, another deadline, another warning, another day of $104 oil and ships that cannot safely pass through the world's most important waterway. Arachi said something at the BRICS meeting that may be the most honest summary of where this negotiation actually stands. He speaks of an olive branch, Iran's Khamenei advisor said of Trump, but we see only barbed wire. Whether the proposal sent on May 16th is finally an actual olive branch or just more barbed wire with better packaging is the question that will be answered very soon. Pay close attention to what Iran says in the next 24 hours, because whatever comes out of Tehran in that window is not just another diplomatic document. It is the answer to a question that 8 billion people are waiting to hear: whether the war in Iran ends with a deal or whether the bombs start falling again.